All right, I think we're up and running. Let's see if we got, there you go. All right, so this is what I'm going to do here. I've made one of these videos kind of like these other guys, Adam Norris and, what was that guy's name? Jeremy Adams. And so I'm going to put it on presentation. And I got no idea how long it's going to last. So I'm going to go over the stuff, kind of our units. I got something on everything except the last unit we've done, civil liberties, civil rights. I'll try to, I'd go back to the old one we just did. I think you get like a 20-minute version of it. If you're having trouble with it, if it ends up being a long video, what I do is I go to the section that you're not real familiar with. But what this does is kind of borrowing some of the things I've been hearing from the other guys, plus adding our notes to it. And the test kind of looks like it came more from our notes than from their things, seemed to me like. So I wanted you to have this. Okay, so going back all the way to the beginning of the year. So foundations, the different theorists we talked about. I believe the three you ought to know are Locke, Montesquieu, and Rousseau. So Locke's the guy who says he's a social contract theorist. Everybody's got the right, by nature, they've got natural rights like life, liberty, and property. And so Jefferson is borrowing from Locke when he's writing the Declaration of Independence. So he's a social contract theorist talking about everybody having natural rights. And remember the article, the argument of the Declaration of Independence is government's job is to protect your rights. If it doesn't, you've got the right or the duty to get rid of it, alter or abolish it. Montesquieu is our three branches of government man, separation of power. So he's a French theorist, and he says it's not going to work to have all the power. It's inefficient to have all the power in one place. So Madison's borrowing the notion of separation of powers from him. I would say checks and balances is kind of Madisonian, kind of uniquely. And then Rousseau's democracy says, the government wants to do the government needs to do what's the will of the people. So popular sovereignty and democracy kind of coming from Rousseau. The Declaration of Independence, like I said, famous stuff. The famous second paragraph is inspiring Lincoln and King and, Gettysburg and the I Have a Dream speech. We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal and endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. That among these are life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. And then he's going to say, hey, the purpose of the government is to protect those rights. If it doesn't protect those rights, alter or abolish it. So it's a social contract. There's a deal between us and the government. Government's end of the deal is protect our rights. Our end of the deal is to obey the law if it's protecting our rights. Okay, so that's kind of motivating the ideas behind the Declaration of Independence. As we know, our first plan for government was Articles of Confederation, set up a weak national government, strong state governments. There was one branch in that government. There was Congress, and they wanted to make it hard for government to do anything. So 9 of the 13 states were required to pass law. 13 of the 13 states were required to amend the Constitution, which makes it all but impossible to amend the Constitution. Let's see. Weaknesses of the government under the Articles. It provides no rest is going to be our acronym. And I would say the R and the T is the most important too. So couldn't regulate trade, couldn't enforce laws. That's the executive branch. There wasn't an executive branch. That's a big deal. Couldn't settle disputes between states. That's kind of the courts, the judicial branch's job to settle disputes. And then tax, at least, was the immediate thing. So Shays' Rebellion, they can enforce laws, and the government can't tax to pay for anything it's trying to do. So taxation was a big deal. Okay. Oh, already got that. Let's keep going. All right, so they decide first to meet in Annapolis, Maryland, if you recall. Not enough states showed up, so they meet in Philadelphia. The father of the Constitution is James Madison. He comes up with this new plan, the Virginia Plan, also known as the Big State Plan. The bigger the state, the more the power, the more representatives. But the small states didn't like that. The New Jersey Plan, also known as the Small State Plan. So they put those two plans together in the Great Compromise that creates our smile click bicameral legislature. You got the House and the Senate. The House is based on the Virginia Plan. The Senate is based on the New Jersey Plan. So 435 people in the House. The bigger the state, the more the power. 100 people in the Senate, 2 per state. All right, the other two compromises were the Slave Trade Compromise and the 3/5 Compromise. Uh-oh, I don't want to shut down the computer. Let me see, cancel. Okay. The Slave Trade Compromise said that the slave trade would continue for 20 years. 3/5 Compromise is you count 3 of every 5 slaves for the purpose of representation in the House of Representatives. All right. You got the 7 articles of the Constitution. Remember, the first 3 are the 3 branches in the order we say them: legislative, executive, judicial. 4, federalism, relations between states, extradition. States give full faith and credit to each other's laws. So, when I got married in Georgia, I moved to Florida. The next day I was still married because the states respect each other's laws. 5 is the amendment process. I kind of think Fifth Amendment there. 6 is the supremacy clause, kind of a federalism thing, and helps, partially accounts for the growth of government. 7 is the ratification process. 9 of the 13 states needed to ratify the Constitution. Okay, the principles of this thing: separation of powers. And most of these things are Madison's way of spreading out power every which way that he can, so it doesn't get concentrated and you don't have tyranny, is what he's calling concentrated power that's going to take away your rights and oppress people. So separation of powers is 3 branches, each with his own job: legislative, executive, judicial. Legislative is called the Congress, executive is the president and the bureaucracy, judicial is the courts. The Congress makes the laws, the president proposes and enforces the laws, the bureaucracy helps them with that. The courts review and interpret the laws. All right, checks and balances, that's the branches make sure that each other's not too strong. So to check means to stop one branch from becoming too powerful. All right, at some point I'll probably try to add, some sort of graph there, table, one of those triangles. But if you make it in your head, remember the courts have judicial review. They can declare laws unconstitutional. The president appoints members of the courts. The Senate confirms members of the court. So there's a check that the president and the Senate has over the courts. The president can veto laws made by Congress. Congress can eat that apple on the president. Override, impeach, approve treaties and appointments. O for override, I for impeach, A for approve, T and A for treaties and appointments. Eat that apple. Federalism, is powers divided between the national government and the states. Republicanism, we're electing leaders to make decisions for us, and we're thinking they're going to have time to think about this stuff, and so they're going to kind of refine our opinions. We've got these things we want done when we feel all emotional, but the leaders are kind of the saucer to the people's cup, if you'll use a metaphor that's been used by Congress. All right, popular sovereignty, that's democracy. We the people. First 3 words of the Constitution. Rule of law. Both the people and the government have to obey the law. Immigration, and like Nixon and Watergate comes up there. Limited government. You don't want the government having too much power. That's tyranny. So there's your constitutional principles. Okay, ratification. The Federalist Papers were written to convince New York anti-federalists to go along with it. Remember, the anti-federalists are concerned that's going to be a too strong government, that the president's too much like a king, that the Electoral College is undemocratic. They're concerned with people's rights and states' rights. So the big 2 in the Federalist Papers. Number 10, that's the one about factions. So what do you do about factions? You create pluralism, really. You create a large republic. Bigger is better, says Madison. That's his unique idea. Up until that point, like Aristotle and the Greeks said, a small government is a better place because everybody knows everybody. But what Madison says is in small towns, you get a few first families kind of running everything. So you want to spread out the power, spread out the factions, and that kind of sets up our version of pluralism where the factions kind of balance each other out and they're spread out and they can't dominate things. Federalist 51 is the angel stuff. If men were angels, no government would be necessary. So angels govern men, neither internal nor external controls would be necessary. So he's saying this is the just right plan for government because it sets up a strong government that controls us. We're not angels. Checks and balances, that's the government controlling itself because Trump and Obama and whoever, Nixon, whatever president, whatever leaders, they're not angels either. Okay. Let's see. So I'm going to stop for a second. Go back over whatever you need to. Pause it if you need to. All right, I took a breath. All right, moving on to federalism. All right, so that's power divided between the state and the national government. All right, if you had a table, it'd be like a tic-tac-toe with the last line missing, and on the left over there, it'd be national powers. That's what you got written down on your notes early on in the year. National powers on the left, they're called delegated to powers, given to the national government by the Constitution. War, money, and foreign policy are all things done by the national government. State powers are over on the right on that table. They're also called reserve powers by the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment is the states' rights amendment. If you get a multiple choice question about amendments in federalism, 10th Amendment is, the state's federal, state's favorite is the word, favorite amendment. Okay, the 3 education elections license. It's a Georgia driver's license. The states handle elections, and, I get paid by the state of Georgia. State education system. States handle education. All right, shared powers are by both are called concurrent, both going on at the same time. Taxes, laws, courts are things that the national government and the states do at the same time. Okay, views of federalism. I think y'all have this stuff down pretty good. So the dual federalism, the layer cake model, is what Republicans, what conservatives like because it sets clear-cut limits on the national government. Anything that's reserved for the states, the national government can't do it, so the government doesn't grow too much. Cooperative federalism, marble cake, that's preferred by liberals, by Democrats. Liberals and Democrats, when they hear states' rights, you think John C. Calhoun defending slavery, you think Bull Connor defending segregation. So Democrats are suspicious of that phrase, states' rights. And so the national government and the state government powers just kind of all mixed together like the icing in the cake and a marble cake. Okay, I said this in one class. Over the years, the national government has grown, especially since the 30s and the 40s and Franklin Roosevelt. It's because of crises, the 2 teacher guys told us. The Great Depression results in the New Deal, Great Society, later on coming out of that. Wars, World War II, the size of the government grew a whole lot more from World War II than it did from the Great Depression. So crises, economic crises, and war cause the government to grow. Also makes the president stronger when we get to the presidency. Okay, the grants are the money to the states. Categorical grants are for specific things like Michelle Obama free school lunches, and the school lunch has got to be healthy. You don't have the salt and so forth. States don't like that so much because the national government's telling them what to do. Democrats like it. Block grants are more general. The Republicans like it. Far more general things like education. So then the states have more discretion. Let me try to use that word discretion as often as possible. Mandates, the states hate it if they're unfunded because that's the national government just telling the states what to do and they're not giving them any money. The ADA by the first Bush, Americans with Disabilities Act, tells everybody you got to have those ramps at the buildings. No Child Left Behind, second Bush, his education program mandated lots of standardized tests. Okay, functions and advantages of federalism. First, policy labs. So you got all these problems nobody knows what to do about. So states can try out solutions. If it works in the state, well, then the national government can copy them. So Clinton's welfare reform was modeled after what Wisconsin had done. Obama's health care was modeled after what Massachusetts had done. Okay, another thing that federalism does is train officials. Being a governor is good training for being a president. So you had Governor Bush, Governor Clinton, Governor Carter. It also gets people involved. If you're upset about something, you can call up Johnny Meadows right down the road over here at Star Matthews in a way that you can't call up the president. Okay, it also allows for unity without uniformity. California and Georgia are very different, but part of the same United States of America because federalism allows those 2 states to kind of pass different laws. And then the states check the balance of the national government, check the powers of the national government. So in the segregation days, the states check the power to enforce civil rights of the national government. That's not a good thing, but the states are keeping the national government from having a lot of power. Today, the states are resisting some of Trump's immigration stuff, some of his stuff generally. And so, the 2 sides have kind of flipped. The states' riders right now tend to be liberals, and the national, do what the heck the national government tells you to do, tends to be the conservatives and the Trump folks. Okay, I'm stopping. That's your review. All right, let's see what we got next. So that's foundations. 1 down, 4 to go. Linkage to institutions I'm going with next. This is our linkage week, and then next week we'll be back to hitting the branches of government real hard. All right, Political parties are first. The function of political parties spell out worm. Now, I would say that win and mobilizing supporters are the most important too. So if you do a Venn diagram of parties and interest groups, parties will sacrifice goals in order to win elections. Interest groups won't do that. So that desire to win means that parties will compromise in a way interest groups won't. Unify different groups. African Americans as an ethnic group tend to be very anti-gay marriage, but African Americans and gays and lesbians work together to elect Democratic candidates. Run the government. Almost every cabinet member, everybody running any agency for President Trump is now a Republican. Also, the Republican leadership in Congress is running Congress. All right, recruit. They got to get candidates to run. The parties try to get candidates to run, raise money. They're good at that. They target competitive races that they feel like they've got a chance to win. This Georgia race with Ossoff, where he didn't quite win, the Democrats sent a lot of money to him, and I think the Republicans did too. Mobilize supporters. So there's your party linkage institution thing. Trump really did that well. You had a lot of kind of alienated working class folks hadn't been voting, and they turned out for Trump. So I would say winning and mobilizing supporters. Winning because that's the number one goal, mobilizing supporters. That's very much linking people to the government. All right, a couple of things we talked about. I hadn't really seen it in the videos, but could show up on this test. Realignment is a change in who's winning. So what? The Democrats started winning in 1828. That election's called a critical or a realigning election. The Republicans started winning in 1860. The Republicans started winning in 1896 based on economics rather than race. The Democrats started winning in 1932 based on the Great Depression and the New Deal. And the Republicans 668 have had a little bit, but not a big advantage. So we call that de-alignment. Neither side's really dominating, and you have more independents rather than hardcore Democrats, reliable Democrats and reliable Republicans. Realignment tends to take place about every 30 years with a new generation. All right, I would say, de-alignment. You have more independence in my lifetime and your lifetime, although these folks tend to be leaners. The next one, two-party system. All right, we have a two-party system for a couple of reasons, 3 reasons. Number one, I'm going to go with tradition first. That's the way it's always been, going all the way back to the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. All right, second one, plurality, single-member district. All right, every single congressional district, let's take ours here in Calhoun, has one representative, Tom Graves. If you don't like Tom Graves, you don't need to run 5 guys against him. Everybody who opposes him needs to coalesce, unify around one person. So that way the opposition has a chance to win. If you split up the opposition 4 or 5 different ways, there's no way the incumbent ever gets beat. So there's a single congressman for every district. Whoever gets the most votes wins. And so for that reason, forming third parties doesn't pay off. In the Electoral College, every state is winner take all. So third parties tend to play spoilers and hurt things for their own party. So the winner take all system for each state encourages a two-party system. All right, remember what the two teachers said about the third parties. They're like bees. They sting and then they die. So they sting by raising new issues that makes the other parties uncomfortable. They're uncomfortable issues like immigration. The Republicans didn't want to touch immigration. Along comes Trump, almost as a third party candidate there. So they're raising new issues, but pretty quickly, once the parties see that a new issue is a winner, they start pushing the new issue. 1992, there was a Reform Party that was talking about deficit and debt. Well, Clinton gets the nomination, all of a sudden he's talking about deficits and debt. So once one of the main parties takes over the issue, the third party dies. Now the other thing, so that's kind of the benefit of third parties. They're not scared to raise these new issues. The downside of the third party is they hurt the party closest to them. We might be talking about President Hillary Clinton were it not for Jill Stein and Gary Johnson, who were kind of liberally folks, and got some votes in some of those swing states, and probably more votes than the gap between Trump and Clinton. So those two fairly liberal people played the role of spoiler for Clinton. All right. There is a belief, and you see it in some multiple choice questions, that the parties are not as strong as they used to be, and that is bad for democracy. Why? Parties encourage compromise. Interest groups, media, and personal campaigns tend to divide. So interest groups are not willing to compromise. They're focused like factions on their one particular issue. Media likes to sensationalize things. You sell newspapers by writing articles about extreme stuff. Candidates don't form coalitions. They focus on the personality of Obama or Trump. I mean, our last two presidents elected, it's really all about the person rather than the political party. And so these alternatives, what fills the void when the parties get weaker? These alternatives all tends to kind of push extreme politics. Okay, so then the question is the party really in a state of decline? Well, you can break the party into three parts. There's the party in government. That's Congress and the president, the party members who have been elected. The party organization, that's the RNC and the DNC, Republican National Committee, Democrat National Committee, people who work for the political parties for a living. And, they got chairman, Reince Priebus, who's now the chief of staff, is the former chairman of the RNC. And then you've got the party in the electorate, that's us, the voters. So is the party in decline? Well, only in the electorate. More and more voters identify themselves as independents as opposed to Democrats or Republicans. The Democrats and the Republicans are very unified in Congress. You have party line votes on almost everything. So the parties are very strong. The parties control who's the chair of every committee. They control who's the majority in every committee. So the parties are really running Congress. So it's not in a state of decline in Congress. It's also not in a state of decline in the organization because the DNC and the RNC raise lots of money that they can send to candidates that they think have a lot of potential. Even among the independents, most independents are still leaners. My buddy next door, Dr. Marcus, is a self-identified independent, but he always votes Republican. And that tends to be the case for folks who call themselves independent. They vote one party or another. All right, we've got this new vocabulary that we saw on that little quiz. The two teachers talked about it. It's the base and the rank and file. So the base is the true believers, the extremists, the liberals and the conservatives. And in the primaries, these are the folks that are motivated enough to turn out to vote. So Democrats need to say things very liberal in the primaries, and Republicans need to say things very conservative in the primaries. On the other hand, in the general election, the candidates kind of got to pivot and make their way back to the middle, generally speaking. May not have really happened that way this time, but that's the trend. Based on this theory, the political scientists would have predicted, and they did predict, that Clinton would have won, being seen as a more, rank and file oriented Democrat, whereas the base and the true believers and the very conservatives were the ones that were really motivated to vote for Trump. A lot of the moderate Republicans were some of those never-Trumpers. Okay, the primary process has become more democratic. So from the time of, Boss Tweed, all the way up to John Kennedy, the party bosses chose who the nominees were going to be. So they would choose moderates. Kennedy and Nixon in 1960 were two very moderate candidates who almost agreed on everything. That's why the debate on TV, how they sounded and how they looked, ended up being so important because there wasn't a lot of distance between them on the issues. Over the years, average folks are more able to control who's getting the nomination because you're using the primaries and the caucuses. And so that helps the base, kind of hurts the rank and file. All right, every 4 years, the parties have a convention. It lasts 4 days. First couple of days, they publish a platform, and you have kind of a new up-and-comer in the party gives the keynote address. Third day, the vice president speaks. The fourth day, the president speaks. There we go. Look at that. I'm going to take about a 45-second break. Hey, if you heard that, you heard me. You caught me talking to myself. I was planning something I was going to say in class tomorrow. Didn't even know I was saying it. Okay, here we go. Interest groups. Let's see. So interest groups, the definition, they're associations that represent the interests of their members. So the definition is almost in the word. Okay, our acronym on that, I don't know, let her rip. They're ripping the parties, they're ripping the electoral system, they're ripping their opponents. I don't know how you want to put it, but it spells out RIP, R-I-P-P. They represent their members, obviously enough. Information that they provide, for example, in those amicus curiae briefs, and when they're lobbying congressmen is really, really important. So information is a big deal. They provide a way for folks to participate that are kind of alienated and mobilizing supporters. And then the most important thing they're doing is they're fighting for policy. So they want to win the policy as opposed to the election. And so they're less willing to compromise their values and their commitments than the parties are. All right, there's your top groups. NAACP works through the courts for African Americans. The NRA and the Christian Coalition, kind of ideological groups. And the AARP is the best funded and the biggest group. The incentives. Remember, free rider problem. If the AARP protects my Social Security for when I turn 60, whatever, I might as well not join because I get it anyway. But they overcome the problem of the free rider by, when I join, they give me cheap vacations. My parents, when they go to Hilton Head with us in the summertime, they vacation more cheaply than we do because they've got the AARP discount. All right, material. So that's a material incentive. Salary incentives. Hey, gun owners like hanging out with each other. Christians like hanging out with each other. Ideological incentives. The NRA and the Christian Coalition are very committed groups, so pretty ideological. All right, so all these are ways of overcoming the problem of the person, the free rider, the person who benefits from the efforts of the group but doesn't want to pay the price for admission, doesn't want to pay dues to enter. Okay, so then the question is, are they good or bad? They're good because they're committed to the cause. They don't compromise. But hey, they're also bad because they don't compromise, so they won't work with other groups. Also, they're mobilizing folks who have a low sense of efficacy, folks who are alienated and don't trust the government. And they kind of, Madison's theory is that they balance each other out. And you see that in the Gorsuch nomination where you have both pro-choice and pro-life groups lobbying the Senate Judiciary Committee for and against Gorsuch's nomination. The bad side of it is they're uncompromising and they factionalize. They don't want to work with other groups, and democracy doesn't work very well if you don't have compromise. Also, some folks feel like they're kind of controlled by a few folks at the top. And then you have this problem of hyperpluralism, which says that you got so many groups that just overwhelms the system. They ask the governments for stuff. The government leaders kind of tend to say, yes, they spend too much money, hence the debt. Here at school, I would like to ask you to come to class tomorrow. Don't hang out after the, what do you call it? The mock crash. Mock crash is a good thing. I want everybody to be safe at the prom, but we always have these things that will give you a legitimate reason for missing class. So you get out of school, then you just don't come back. So that threatens from time to time to overwhelm what? The extracurricular activities threaten to overwhelm the curriculum from time to time. So you kind of see that hyperpluralism as an example right here at Calhoun. Another example of your best quality being your worst quality. It's good to have these activities. It's bad not to be able to come to class. All right, laws. There's 3 laws regulating interest groups and lobbyists. A lobbyist is somebody who works for the interest group, hangs out in the lobby, and tries to persuade lawmakers to do what the group wants. First one's called the Regulation of Lobbying Act right after World War II, and it says if you're a lobbyist, you got to register with the government. Disclosure. We got to know who's lobbying our leaders. But a lot of people didn't register, so In the 90s, the Clinton years, they had something called the Lobbying Disclosure Act defining a lobbyist. If you spend this amount of money, you spend this amount of time lobbying, well, then you're a dang lobbyist and you have to admit it. All right, and then finally you have this thing, the Honest Leadership and Open Government Act, that tries to cut down on the revolving door, where somebody works in Congress, they step down, then they join an interest group and start lobbying. And that's seen as kind of corrupt because they know, it's that iron triangle thing. All these folks are just kind of hanging out with each other just all the time. All right, activities of interest groups. If they're unpopular, like the NAACP was in the 50s, or gay rights groups were, maybe 70s and 80s, they go through the course because you just got to persuade a few judges of what the Constitution says rather than a bunch of voters and leaders. Number one activity is lobbying. They lobby Congress. They can lobby the bureaucracy. People are calling ICE right now concerning immigration. The groups lobby the Judiciary Committee. They can't lobby, they can't make donations to judges' campaigns because judges don't run, they get appointed. But they can lobby the Judiciary Committee when they're trying to decide whether or not to confirm Gorsuch or Garland. Okay, PACs donate money to campaigns, political action committees, that's the financial wings of the interest groups. Amicus curiae briefs are basically groups lobbying the court, writing brief summaries of why their side has the right argument about the Constitution in the court case. All right, history of groups. Gilded Age, Progressive Era tends to be business groups like the Chamber of Commerce and National Association of Manufacturers versus Labor, the AFL-CIO. After that, civil rights groups like the NAACP and the SCLC. And they're doing kind of they're marching, demonstrations. Values groups, the Christian Coalition in the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, all the way, first is the Moral Majority, Christian Coalition 700 Club, public interest groups, Public Citizen, and dang it, I can't remember the other one. But they're doing things that's good for, it's a consumer group. Oh, it escapes me. All right, but a public interest group works not just for one particular faction, but for the whole country. At least they claim to. And then more recently, especially coming out of Citizens United, you've got a lot of corporate donations because Citizens United takes the limits off corporate donations and categorizes corporation as a person with free speech rights. Okay, I'm stopping, pausing, taking a minute to breathe, and have at it. Hey, ask me questions. Send me emails with questions. I'll try to get to them. If not, ask me questions in the morning. Ask me questions when you're walking into class. If you ask me a question before the bell rings, that doesn't count for the 5 questions for the test. Okay, the media. The media is kind of straightforward. So let's see. Let's start with the roles. So you got the watchdog role. They're going to tell us about bad stuff going on. That tends to make folks, we can look out for corruption and tyranny, but on the other hand, we get a little cynical and don't trust the government. The agenda setter, they're telling us what to think about, also known as the gatekeeper. Scorekeeper or horse race coverage, they're kind of keeping up with the polls, who's winning and losing in a race. We saw that, quite a bit in the election. Let me go down to the critiques. Conservatives really see the media as liberal biased. Fox is kind of conservative. They're sensational, so they're going to focus on, they sell more papers with sensationalism, so they never really focus on in-depth issue coverage. That tends to be what the multiple choice question about the media always says. So it's shallow coverage, either the personalities, some event of the campaign, poll numbers, almost never in-depth coverage of an issue, how this thing's going to affect people. All right, if we go back, the history of the media, founding period, the Federalists and Democratic Republicans each had their own newspaper, so they didn't try to be objective. Age of Jackson. Hey, the common man can read. You got to give him cheap paper, so it's called the penny press. Yellow press. Well, start the Spanish-American War, the sinking of the Maine. They sensationalized things in order to sell newspapers. The muckrakers were these progressive reform writers. Upton Sinclair, The Jungle, History of Standard Oil, Ida Tarbell, talking about, corporate and party boss abuses. Starting right around this time of consensus, after World War II, the 50s, the press is trying really hard to be objective. Walter Cronkite was like, in the 70s, was like the most trusted man in America. But then more recently, you get more bias, Fox versus CNN. You get the awful stuff that gets posted online. And the more savage, the more out there, the more bizarre the things you post on the internet, the more likely you are to get the thumbs ups and the likes. So there's no editors on a website or a blog, and so, that's a concern with the media. Fake news is kind of the latest thing we've been hearing about the media. Okay, elections. All right, in an election, you have primaries and caucuses first. That's when the folks are fighting to get the nominations. The party candidates are fighting to get the nomination. So there's the base and the rank and file. So the base is more likely to turn out for these primaries and caucuses, especially caucuses. So that kind of pulls the candidates to the extremes. So you kind of have a democratic process. Folks who take the time to go out there and vote have a big time say-so, but you get an undemocratic result because you end up with extreme candidates that don't represent everyday Americans. So, in the election, people are saying, how did we end up with Clinton and Trump? Well, it's this process here. Whereas Jim Webb was a very moderate Democrat that nobody's heard of. Kasich, very moderate Republican, didn't have much luck. Dr. Marcus and I agreed that we would have voted for either one of these two over either of the actual candidates. So you have two guys good bit apart ideologically that if you had moderate candidates would have agreed, but this process gives us Clinton and Trump as opposed to moderates. Okay, front-loading, the states try to influence the nomination process by putting their primaries and caucuses early on. So Iowa caucuses come first and then New Hampshire primaries, and so they have a lot of influence over momentum. And then people make donations to people they think have momentum. And then when people hear that you're getting a lot of money, they give you more money. So southern states have something early on like March called Super Tuesday. But what they're doing is they're moving their primaries up so they have more influence over the outcome of the nomination process. All right, Democrats in about the 80s or so implemented this thing in their primary process called superdelegates. Party leaders get a vote to add to average voters in the primary process. So John Lewis got a vote, Sonny Perdue got a vote, and Sonny Perdue's a Republican. But party leaders are kind of sticking their thumb on the scale and that's how Clinton got the nominations. It's unclear whether Clinton got more votes than Sanders did, but these superdelegates helped put Clinton over the top. The primary process for Democrats is proportional representation. So in a state, in the Georgia primary, let's say Clinton got 55% of the Georgia vote and Sanders got 45%. Well, they get that percentage of the delegates for that state. So the Democrats see that as more fair. It kind of slows down the process because it takes longer to get to however many delegates you need to win the nomination. The Republicans, on the other hand, have winner take all. So if Trump gets 55% in Georgia and Cruz got 45%, Trump gets all the delegates. And so that helps the Republicans decide on their winner earlier and unite around that winner. All right. So first you got to win the primaries, then you win the general election. So there's your electoral college. 538 electoral votes all total because you add up, every state gets number of electoral votes equal to its number in the House plus the 2 senators. So 435 members of the House plus 100 senators plus the 3 for D.C. equals 538. Majority of that, half of that's 269, so majority of that's 270. Okay, 48 states in the electoral college in the general election, not the primary process. The general election is winner take all. And Maine and Nebraska have a modified proportional representation system. Okay, when we go to vote, we're not voting for the candidates. We're voting for the Democrat or the Republican slate of electors. And then you have the actual Electoral College vote early in January. In this, a faithless elector is somebody who is elected by their state to vote for one candidate, but then they don't like it and they vote for somebody else. The original intent of the Electoral College would be that you would have lots and lots of faithless electors. These electors would be more enlightened than the average people, and so the average people made, it's kind of a check on the power of the average people. If the people made a bad decision, the electors could pick somebody else. Lots of Democrats were lobbying electors in Republican states not to vote for Trump. When the Electoral College actually voted, he ended up with actually more faithless electors, 3 who didn't vote for Clinton from Democrat states than 2 who didn't vote for Trump from Republican states. That's the faithless electors have never decided elections. And they're less likely to be faithless since the Jackson days, because that's, the days of the common man, and you're supposed to trust the average people. All right, review it. When you're looking at this thing, I'm saying a lot of words fast, so it might be that you want to, maybe turn off the volume. Then you just look at the stuff and ask yourself what you know, and then you go back to the stuff that you don't know and turn the volume back up. Let me yell and rant and rave about it for a minute, and then you turn the volume back off. So you decide how you want to do that. All right, let's get to the branches of government then. All right, so the president. Been a little while since we did the president. Yeah. I'm going to do a couple of slides here, and then I'll have to stop. And maybe I'll come back. Luke's got a tennis match. I'll try to come back after that. All right, but let me get a couple slides. All right, so the president. So Article 2. He's got to be 35 years old, natural-born citizen in the United States for 14 years. He's got the power to appoint. That's a constitutional power. It's in the Constitution. That he can appoint members of the cabinet and the staff. The cabinet tends to go native. They become more loyal to their department. The staff doesn't require confirmation, so those are his closest advisors. He's got the power to pardon, to set convicted people free. Mass pardons called an amnesty. Carter did an amnesty for draft dodgers after the Vietnam War. This is also in the Constitution. He's got the power to send and receive ambassadors. So that's kind of his chief diplomat function. All right, a law in 1973 passed about the president that you're guaranteed to see on the test. At least the one that I'm fixing to give you, because I've seen it on that test. I'm telling you one of the questions, is the War Powers Act. So when the president sends troops somewhere, he's got to notify Congress within 48 hours. If they don't like it, he's got to start bringing the troops back within 60 days. And once he starts bringing them back, he's got another 30 days to get them home. This was passed. Here's your multiple choice question. This was passed after Vietnam to take war-making powers away from the president because folks felt like Johnson and Nixon had too much power. They called them the imperial presidents. So you're trying to keep the balance between Congress and the president. War-making is a shared power between Congress and the president. We talk about separation of powers. A lot of times a better way to describe it is shared powers. Law-making proposed by the president, made by the Congress, that's a shared power rather than a separate power. And war-making is kind of a shared power between the two. Okay, what else do we need to say? Okay, you know about the vetoes. It takes 2/3 of both houses of Congress to override the veto. A pocket veto, it becomes a law. If they're still in session after 10 days, it's dead if they've adjourned after 10 days. There's not a line item veto. Reagan really wanted a line item veto to where if you have like a spending bill, especially if there's a rider on a bill, he could just draw a line straight through that rider. And he felt like that would keep spending under control. Every governor has a line item veto. Reagan had a line item veto as governor of California. So he really wanted it. Clinton got it, but then somebody sued, and in the court case it's called I think it's called Clinton versus the U.S. And the court ruled that the line item veto violates separation of powers, so the president doesn't have it. Okay, the president can use this informal power. What did we say? An informal amendment. The executive order and the executive agreement to overcome checks and balances. So the executive order overcomes the need to get Congress to pass a law, at least for a time, while that president's in there. And executive agreement overcomes the need for the Senate to ratify a treaty. So you're trying to overcome the checks and the balances there. All right, the Presidential Succession Act was passed in 1947. What happens if the president dies or can't do the job? Here's the order of succession. Well, we know the vice president. If Trump and Pence both, something happened to them, well, then Ryan, the Speaker of the House, will become president. Something happened to him, next in line would be President pro tempore of the Senate, and then the cabinet members starting in, and the cabinet goes in the order that the department was created. So the State Department's the oldest, so it would be the first of the 15 to replace the president. Homeland Security, Secretary of Homeland Security, would be the last of those folks. The 25th Amendment is Presidential Succession Amendment. It also says the vice president, if he becomes president, has to pick a new vice president. Also sets up this policy that Pence could declare Trump crazy if the vice president can convince a majority of the cabinet that the president's unfit for duty. They can kick him out temporarily, but then the president probably says, well, wait a minute, I'm fine. And 2/3 of both houses of Congress would have to uphold that coup, which is harder than the impeachment process, so it probably wouldn't happen, but sets up at least the technical possibility of a vice presidential coup. All right, impeachment is a majority of the House, 2/3 of the Senate to convict, majority of the House to my words are gone, too many words. Accuse. A majority of the House to accuse, and then 2/3 of the Senate to convict. Clinton and Johnson got impeached. Andrew Johnson came within one vote of getting convicted. All right, the informal powers. Let's look what we got next. So I'm going to stop at bureaucracy. We won't do bureaucracy yet. All right, the president has become stronger since Roosevelt. Roosevelt is your turning point because of crisis. The Depression, also World War II. So ever since then, we kind of look to the president to solve all our problems. Now, he's got all these roles, some of them formal roles laid out by the Constitution, some of them that have kind of evolved. As presidential power has the two teachers, the Dan guy, the two teachers said aggrandize. The power is aggrandize. So the commander-in-chief, that's in the Constitution. He sends troops some places. But he can't declare war. That's the Congress's job. Chief diplomat, that's the Constitution. He sends and receives ambassadors, conducts foreign policy, makes treaties. Head of state, that's a new thing. It's throwing out the first pitch. The ceremonies, the ceremonial role of the president. Chief agenda setter, that's evolved coming out of the New Deal. The founders intended for Congress to make the laws, but now we look to the president to propose laws to Congress and to kind of determine what the agenda is going to be. The chief executive, that's not right. He enforces law, so that one's not evolved. That's in the Constitution. Representative of the nation, this idea that he's supposed to be a role model. Clinton especially was rough on that one. That's evolved. Early on, presidents' private lives kind of stayed private. Okay, these are the executive order and the agreements are informal, designed, once again, overcome checks and balances. The staff are as close as advisors. You don't need Senate confirmation. Leading 3 members of the staff. We've seen these guys. The press secretary, Spicer, Saturday Night Live, likes to do those skits on Spicer. The chief of staff is officially Priebus. Bannon is named the counsel to the president, so he's got the president's ear too. So it's almost like having a co-chief of staff right now. National Security Advisor's name McMaster. That's where Trump is getting his highest marks right now. So the National Security Advisor is kind of well thought of. He took Flynn's place. You had that scandal about Flynn. Okay, presidential effectiveness is going to be highest during the honeymoon period. He's going to be the most popular. Everybody kind of gives him a chance. Also, he tries to win over the people by using the bully pulpit, by going straight to people, making speeches on TV. Trump's been having rallies to try to win support for repeal and replace Obamacare. Obama would come on TV and appeal to the public to push for gun control laws. Neither one of those uses of the bully pulpit worked. Rally effect, poll numbers tend to go up. Even though they go down generally, they go up during a crisis. Let's talk about power. The definition of power is the ability to get people to do things they wouldn't otherwise do. Presidential power comes more from these informal powers. You know, some presidents, like Carter, are seen as weak, even though he's got the same constitutional power as a strong president like Reagan. So it's the power to persuade, one of our authors that we studied called Neustadt says. Kind of similar to the majority leader in the Senate. All right, I'm stopping. All right, I will pick up with the bureaucracy. Let me go over here. And I'm going to watch a tennis match.